Okay, in this video I'm just going to read and then analyze this position paper, which was provided by Yale as a model position paper. So as you can see in the top left corner, we have all of our formatting that we need. So you need to have the committee that you're in, the topic that you're addressing in this particular paper, your country, our school, and then your name after delegate. If you're along paired with another student, put the other student's name as well. Okay, so I'm just going to read this. I might break it down by paragraph. So I'm just going to read it and analyze it. Okay. The question of Security Council reform has remained at the forefront of international debate for over a decade, and nations have reached an inevitable deadlock in their efforts to increase the Council's legitimacy. In 1993, the United Nations passed Resolution 4826, which established a working group that would debate pragmatic approaches to reform. So I'm actually just going to stop here and talk a little bit about what I'm seeing here as strengths of this position paper. So you can see that the style is fairly sophisticated, just the actual phrasing and expression sounds polished and professional and what one would expect from a delegate in the United Nations. So I think you could steal a lot of this phrasing in many of the papers that you would write. So you could really just kind of like fill in the blanks like Mad Libs. The question of blank has remained at the forefront of blank debate for a blank amount of time. Usually the nations have reached an inevitable deadlock. Usually the countries don't know what to do exactly, so they're stymied and not doing anything. So this in general is just summarizing the situation. I see this as a strength that there's a date and then a specific resolution cited. I think that if resolutions are mentioned in your topic guide, then you want to put those facts with the specific numbers of the resolutions into your position paper. Pragmatic is a good word to sprinkle throughout your, put it once in each position paper, maybe if it makes sense, or integrate it into the debate, because pragmatic just means practical, and that's really one of the things that we're aiming for in everything we do in Model UN. We're trying to develop practical approaches, practical solutions to problems. Okay, and then I see this right here, this transition, however, as something that you probably want to incorporate in your first paragraph, because they're saying here's something that was pretty good. Typically it's a resolution that was pretty good and pretty effective in addressing a problem. However, there are still these issues that remain, which is why this topic is being addressed in this topic guide. All right, I'll keep reading now. However, in 14 years of discussion, this committee has only revealed a universal outcry for prompt expansion of membership that would better reflect the realities of modern power distribution. Recent discourse has pitted the G4, Germany, India, Japan, and Brazil, China, Africa, and Arab nations against one another as each promotes solutions motivated, look, there's a typo, motivated largely by self-interest. So now something I see as a strength here is that the student is identifying some of the overarching characteristics of some of these countries. All right, I'm going to keep reading. Within this debate, the United Kingdom, UK, has openly demonstrated its support for the G4 nations, each of whom represent emerging powers with some of the largest fiscal contributions to the United Nations. The working group is now occupied with implementing suggestions offered in the 2005 World Summit outcome, including the consideration of gradual or temporary reform of SC membership. So here, the student is just bringing up to speed on the current state of affairs. So the main question here is kind of who should be in the Security Council, and the student's just summarizing what's happened in the recent past regarding this issue. And now the student's going to narrow her focus to discuss specifically what Britain, the UK, is doing about this issue. Okay. In 2005, Britain formally supported a draft resolution proposed by the G4 that outlined their vision of expansion. However, in a statement affirming its general support, Britain felt compelled to reiterate its unwillingness to extend veto power beyond the current P5 nations. I'm just going to speak a little bit about this. So now we're learning what Britain's stance specifically is on expanding participation in the Security Council. And this seems like a sentence that you'd probably want to replicate. You'd want to say, my country supported a draft resolution proposed by these countries, and summarize what the resolution contained. And then you also just want to point out what are some of the little tiny details that your country took issue with in the previous resolution. All right, now I'm just picking up where I left off right here. All right, the G4 working paper was met with firm resistance from countries such as the US. This is a good strategy to list countries who have opposed your country's resolution, the resolution that your country supported. Okay, so I'm just going to reread that. The G4 working paper was met with firm resistance from countries such as the US, who opposed Germany's seat, and China, who opposed Japan's seat. Since then, the G4 has shied away from addressing the veto component of reform and has consequently enjoyed Britain's continued support. In the past, Britain has also been open to intergovernmental negotiations and even consultation with certain non-governmental organizations. So it's just saying in the past, Britain has been open to some of these different paths or courses of action. And then here's a specific detail that supports that. In fact, in as early as 1994, the UK supported the formation of the NGO Working Group on the Security Council, which brought together certain diverse NGOs such as Amnesty International and Earth Action with the aim of debating Security Council reform with more neutral representatives. So this, I like how this student is weaving in how the country Britain interacted with NGOs. So this is something that you probably want to try to figure out for your second paragraph. You want to figure out, did my country interact with non-governmental organizations at all to address whatever issue is presented in the topic guide? All right, so now I'm picking up here. Thus far, these NGOs have introduced changes amenable to the United Kingdom, such as the publication of special reports concerning key Security Council decisions that could then be formally reviewed by NGOs. So now this paper is just saying what the NGOs have contributed that's positive. And here's a fancy phrase that you could probably make work for you. These blanks, it actually doesn't matter what this is. These proper nouns have introduced changes amenable to blank. So amenable to just means that it's acceptable to these people, it's agreeable. That's a nice fancy sentence that you guys could use. Okay, and now finally we're going to hear what the UK proposes as a solution to this question of who should be allowed to be in the Security Council and how should that be managed. Okay, in the future, the United Kingdom remains reluctant to modify the current veto status of P5 nations and believes that granting additional veto power will only hinder the expediency of the Council in responding to crises. Okay, so there's a lot of things I like about this that I think you can replicate in your own. I think you could always say, in the future, and then my country remains some characteristics. So it could be remains reluctant to change. It could be remains eager to change, or remains concerned that. You just want to speak about your country's current perspective on the situation. All right, and I'll pick up here. However, in a number of 2007 bilateral discussions, the UK expressed its intentions to create permanent seats for each of the G4 nations. So this is just some solution the UK has proposed in the past. In November 2007, Gordon Brown commented that interim options must be examined to reform the United Nations. This idea of interim options, which just means a plan for the in-between time when we're sorting out what we want, this is a good idea to say that our country believes that interim options should be examined. That's kind of a generic thing you could almost always say. It just means we're at this crossroads and maybe nothing's happening, as often is the case with diplomacy and bureaucracy. So you're saying we need an interim plan, which just means an in-between plan, what to do in the meantime. Okay, now I'll just pick up here. Okay. Interim options must be examined to reform the United Nations Security Council, whose permanent members today do not include Japan, India, Brazil, Germany, or any African country, so we can make the council more representative, more credible, and more effective. And this is also something that I like. You want to say that you're going to make changes that will create a more, and then a bunch of good adjectives, so like a more representative, more credible, more effective, maybe more democratic, fairer, more just, those kinds of adjectives. You could put that in your conclusion. You could say that the choices that we're going to make will create a more, and then all these positive adjectives, a more effective, more productive, safer environment, any kind of positive adjective. All right, I'll just keep reading. Hence, the UK advocates the expansion of the Security Council from 15 to 24 or 25 seats. I like this. This country advocates blank. And I like hence is just a fancy word for therefore. You could say therefore. Okay, now I'll just pick up here. With 6 additional permanent members, including the G4 and either 1 or 2 nations from Africa, the UK also firmly believes in increased transparency of the Security Council's actions in order to allow maximum involvement of non-members. Increased transparency is pretty much always a good thing. It just means that there's no secrets about what processes governments are using or the UN is using. It's all very clear and straightforward. All right, the United Kingdom is also open to considering the transitional approach that has been pursued by certain nations, whereby seats are added to the Security Council for a predetermined length of time, at which point a review council will discuss the effectiveness of the council. There's 2 things I like about this concluding part of this final paragraph. So I like that the UK delegate is proposing a transitional approach. This is always a good idea, pretty much, if you're at a crossroads, just saying we need interim options and we need a transitional approach. Another thing that's a good idea is just saying that there's a review council, so there's a group of diverse people, maybe some from NGOs, from some representing certain countries, and there's a diversity of countries. It's always good to have a review council that analyzes something. That's always a good thing to say in the conclusion. In the conclusion, the final paragraph, there are also some other solutions that pretty much always resonate. So education. So for example, educating people about how to avoid getting malaria is something that I've seen in a World Health Organization discussion. Um, any kind of monitoring system is typically good to put in the final paragraph. So you're saying we're going to implement this change and then we're going to monitor it through this very meticulous recording process. Okay, so hopefully this gives you an idea more so of what you're about to embark upon with writing the position paper. And just make sure you reach out to me and to former students if you should encounter any difficulty with this process. And if you really invest your time, it's going to put you in such a better position for the conference. It's going to be very worthwhile to have put this effort into developing your solutions and into learning about the current state of affairs in your country with respect to this particular issue.